Okay, so with the third portion of the third book, the portion of Shmini, which means eight, the eighth day, the beginning of the book, we talked about the laws of offerings in the first portion and a half, and then we're coming back to the only episode of the third book of the Torah. The episode of the third book of the Torah is the eighth day of the inauguration, and we'll talk about the eighth day, but it's basically the first day that the temple was built and established. In other words, there were 7 days that was sort of inauguration, meaning a practice run. And the eighth day is we're starting the regular service. And this is in some ways is the greatest day of Jewish history because that's the day that the divine presence dwells in the temple. And that's what we're going to read about. That's the episode. Like I said, the only major episode of the book of Leviticus. There is one more actually, a tragic episode at the end, very short. But here it is also tragedy. So it's a mixed emotions during this day because Aaron, who is the high priest and who really brings about the dwelling of the divine presence, the Shekhinah, the divine presence in the temple, two of his sons die on this day. So there's a lot to talk about, tremendous amount of things to think about and talk about. So we'll jump right in because we only have a limited amount of time, so no time to waste. Okay, we'll share the screen and Parsha in a nutshell. Okay, here we go. The name of the Parsha, Shmini, means eighth, and is found in Leviticus chapter 9, verse 1. On the eighth day, following the 7 days of their inauguration, Aaron and his sons begin to officiate as Kohanim priests. So that's the opening commandments. And again, it talks about the specific offerings that they would have to bring on that day for the eighth day. A fire issues forth from God to consume the offerings on the altar, and the divine presence comes to dwell in the sanctuary. So they see the divine presence. They see the cloud, but they see this as the divine presence. Aaron's two elder sons, Nadav and Avihu, offer a strange fire before God, which he commanded them not. So they take fire, they take incense, they go into the temple. We refer to it as strange fire, Ish Zara, and die before God. Aaron is silent in face of tragedy. Moses and Aaron subsequently disagree as to a point of law regarding the offerings, but Moses concedes to Aaron that Aaron is in the right. Now, again, obviously, you could look at this as a technical disagreement, but you can see this as a deeper point that really characterizes Moses and Aaron's varying perspectives on life and on the service of God and on leadership, and that's tied into the greater story of the day. Hopefully, we can get into that as well. Now we go back to the laws. Why these laws is a good question, but these are the laws that we're talking about, and hopefully we can connect them all to the same overarching story. God commands the kosher laws, identifying the animal species permissible and forbidden for consumption. Land animals may be eaten only if they have split hooves and also chew their cud. Fish must have fins and scales. A list of non-kosher birds is given, and a list of kosher insects. There's 4 types of locusts. That's the only exception to insects. All other insects are not kosher, even though I'm told they have it's a very good source of protein, they tell me, but not for Jewish people. Okay. Also in Shmini has some of the laws of ritual purity, including the purifying power of the mikvah, a pool of water meeting specified qualifications, and the wellspring. Thus, the people of Israel are enjoined to differentiate between the impure and the pure. So this is the story in a nutshell. And again, obviously we can read the story, the portion inside, and get tremendous detail. Hopefully, we'll have some time to get into some of the details about some of the stories. And but let's begin with the name because there's always the eighth day. Okay, you know what? Let's open up the parsha just so. Let's open up the parsha so we get a feel. I don't love the translation here, but current parsha, but it's the quickest one. Aliyah summary, Shmini Torah reading. Okay, I don't love this, but okay, we'll have to make do. Okay. So this is the opening statement of the Parsha, Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 9, verse 1. On the eighth day, Moses summoned Aaron's sons, and the elders of Israel. So Moshe calls Aaron and his sons on the eighth day. And in verse 2, he starts listing the different offerings that should be offered on that day. Moses said to Aaron, take for yourself a calf as a sin offering and a ram as an ascent offering, unblemished, and bring them before God. And that's for Aaron. And then you also have for the Jewish people. You must speak to the Israelites, saying, take a he-goat as a sin offering, a calf and a lamb, both in their first year and both unblemished, as an ascent offering. A work bull and a ram as a peace offering to slaughter before God, and a grain offering kneaded with oil, for today God is appearing to you. And then the story continues about how they offer those offerings, and you get to the end, very detailed about how they offer the offerings. That's the end of the first reading, and then you get to the second reading. Again, they continue to offer the offerings. Eventually, they bless the Jewish people. Aaron blesses the Jewish people. Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them. He descended from the altar after having offered up the sin offering, the ascent offering, and the peace offering. Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting. They came out and blessed the people. So again, another blessing, a second blessing. Verse 22, there's a blessing. Verse 23 is another blessing. And finally, and the glory of God appeared to all the people. And then you go to the third reading and you read, fire went forth from before God and consumed the ascent offering and the fats upon the altar. All the people saw this, sang praises, and fell upon their faces, prostrating themselves. And that's the end of chapter 9. And that is the beautiful events of the eighth day. In chapter 10, we talk about the sad events of that day, but that's certainly a highlight. This is a culmination of many, many months of building the temple and building the offering, building the temple in great anticipation of the divine presence dwelling. Okay, so let's start with the first. Now that we've read it inside a little bit, let's just start with the first word for a minute. On the eighth day, Vahi Bayom Hashmini, the first phrase that is. Vahi Bayom Hashmini, it was on the eighth day. Now, it's a very interesting name to call it, the eighth day. Why is it so interesting? Because it really was 1-1. It was the first day of the first month. Okay, we have the tradition of when the temple was built, because the Torah indicates when that was, and it says that it's the first day of the first month, and yet we're referring to it as day 8. So it's the first of Nisan. The first of Nisan. Nisan is the first month, and the first day of Nisan. So it's the first day, and you're calling it number 8. So let's read Rashi. Vahi bayom hashmini, on the 8th day. So Rashi explains the 8th day of the installation rites of the Miluim, which is the inauguration period, which was 1 Nisan, first day of the first month. For on that day the tabernacle was officially erected, and the divine presence was manifest there, as described later. This day received 10 crowns, which are enumerated in Seder Olam, which is the Medrash. Very interesting. When the Medrash lists the 10 crowns, it says it's the first for the days of the week. It's the first for the days of the month. Keeps referring to it as day 1. And here we're referring to it as day 8. So there's a lot of mysticism in the number 8. All the Kabbalists and some of the classic commentators that were more closer to the Kabbalah talk about the number 8. And you want to ask, what does number 8 represent? Now, it's interesting. God, in the previous Parsha and also in the book of Exodus, God says there's going to be a 7-day inauguration period. Earlier, so it's recorded in the Torah twice, both in the book of Exodus and in last week's Parsha. But nowhere does God mention day 8. Day 8, in a way, it's a surprise. The reader, if you read the Torah up to this point, you'd be surprised to read that there is an 8th day. Because the Torah earlier, God talks about the 7 days of inauguration twice, doesn't mention the 8th day. Here, and so what is day? Today's the first of Nisan, but we refer to it as day 8, but God didn't mention it earlier. So there's something interesting about the model of day 8. So here's, in short, what all the Kabbalists will tell you. 7 represents nature. That's why you have 7 days of the week. And within the cycle of nature, the 7th day is the holiest. So Shabbat is holy, but Shabbat is the holiness within nature. Maybe that's why there are 7 days of Passover in Israel. In Israel, there are 7 days. So the 7 days means that the idea of freedom captures the entire cycle of nature, the entire cycle of time, because seven is the basic cycle of time. What is eight? Eight represents that which transcends nature, right? The way we count days, it's almost universal in the world. This week has 7 days. People try to change it, make a 10-day workday, make a 6-day workday, make a 5-day workday. It doesn't really work. It goes back, everybody reverts back to seven, maybe because God creates the world in seven. God created the world in 7 days and created that 7-day cycle. So after day seven, you go back to day one because that's the natural cycle. What does eight mean? Eight means if you can break the natural cycle and transcend the natural cycle, then you get to the one that's above the seven. We read it yesterday. Well, on the final days of the holidays, we read the story of the splitting of the sea and the song that the Jewish people sang when they crossed the sea. What's the first word of the song? Az Yashir, then Moses will sing. So the Kabbalists point out the word az, then, which is future tense, which is song. Song is also the idea of transcending. A person sings when they're uplifted, right? You start dancing, you lift yourself off the floor. The word az is 1-7, the one that's above seven. So eight is the transcendent light that's above the natural cycle. That's the power of number eight. There's an interesting observation from one of the commentators that is also very influenced by the Kabbalah, the Kli Yakar. And he says, if you think about it, there are certain mitzvot that override Shabbat. Shabbat is the holiness of seven. Which mitzvah overrides Shabbat? One mitzvah that overrides Shabbat is the mitzvah of circumcision. On the eighth day, you circumcise the child. Now he says any mitzvah that's associated with the eighth day, it means it's above nature. Right? The idea of circumcision is beyond nature. It's beyond logic. It's beyond nature. Why is it beyond logic? Because the natural thing to do would be to wait till a child understands what's happening and understands that there's a logical reason to connect to God. And that's when you perform the circumcision, which is really the covenant with God. But we're making the covenant with God at day eight. What are we saying? What are we saying when we have the covenant with God at day eight? What we're saying is the bond with God is unconditional. It's beyond the natural cycle within the person. So eight represents going beyond nature. And because the circumcision is on the eighth day and the eighth day is greater than seven, that's why circumcision, if it's on the eighth day, overrides Shabbat. If it's not on the eighth day, it doesn't override Shabbat. So that's interesting about the concept of number eight. How does this tie into what we're saying? There's a general philosophical problem about the relationship between the human being and God. And the question is, what could we do to affect the infinite God? So God says, if you do this, we'll achieve so and so. If you do this mitzvah, if you build the temple, God will dwell. So do the people actually have a power to make a dwelling place for God? We are limited people. We're physical. We're finite. We are fleeting. We're here today, gone tomorrow. And we're going to be able to make a home for the infinite God. It's absurd. It's one of the absurdities of that Judaism captures. It's absurd. Even King Solomon, when he builds the temple in Jerusalem, he gives us this after it was built, he gives this introductory prayer, and he talks about how, in a way, this is very surprising that God, the heavens, the expanses of the heavens, the entire universe, is not large enough to contain God. Now we know we can't fathom the size of the universe, but we understand it's bigger than one temple, one structure, and one mountain in Jerusalem, right? So King Solomon says, the Shamayim Ushmei Shamayim, the heavens and the heavens of the heavens cannot contain you, and yet this house can contain you. So the concept that we're going to say that we could make a home for God, but it's actually more than that. It's we can do a mitzvah and bring God into our life. That's a certain absurdity. It's absurd to think that we're able to do it. So how does this work? So here comes the model, the Kabbalistic model of number eight. What does number eight mean? So eight is an interesting number because we said it's the one that's beyond seven. So eight is touching the supernatural. We cannot create number eight. Only God could create the number eight. That's why we talk about in this day, the Jewish people are going to do everything they could, and something is not working. We touched upon those verses. They bless once, it doesn't work. They go back into the tabernacle, they come back out. You can do whatever you could, but you cannot touch the infinity. Only God could decide to rest and bring his presence into a specific place or time. So, if it's only in the hands of God, what do we have to do anything at all? So, here's the model of number eight. What the model of number eight tells you is a person has to do everything in their power in the natural way. You do whatever you could. You're not going to be able to bring number eight. Only God could bring number eight because number eight is beyond your capacity to achieve. But on the other hand, number eight follows seven. We don't say seven and then one. We don't say we do our part and then God does his part. God will do his part after we do our part. And that's why the number eight, which is beyond nature, which is infinity, so it's not in our power, but God is going to give it to us after we do our work. So there's two mistakes you have to avoid, maybe more than two. But one mistake is to say that we could achieve it. The Torah is very clear. You can't do number eight. You can only do number seven. And that's why God commands us there's only going to be 7 days of inauguration. He said that in the book of Exodus. He says this in the book, in the beginning of the book of Leviticus. Eight is a surprise. Eight only God could perform. Only God could bring the infinity of God into our handiwork. We cannot achieve that. On the other hand, so that's the one mistake. Don't think you could touch the infinite. It's really God connecting. But on the other hand, God will only connect after you do your part. And that's why God's part is called eight. And because eight follows seven. So it's only going to happen after we do our part. And that's a very important concept. And we see this all over. We see this in many other areas of Jewish life. And I'm going to bring one example. But we see this in many areas. I'm going to bring one example. And then we'll maybe try to make it a little practical. So there's a very beautiful mitzvah that starts the second day of Passover and goes all the way to Shavuot, the holiday where we commemorate the receiving of the Torah, or the giving of the Torah, I should say, Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah 7 weeks later. So the Torah says that basically you count 49 days, 7 weeks from the Omer, which is the offering that was brought the second day of Passover, all the way to the day that we get to Torah. Why? It's so there's different commentary. Torah doesn't say why, but the early commentaries already say this is the Jewish people counted toward the giving of the Torah in anticipation. They were so excited that they're going to get the Torah. So when you're excited towards something, the vacation is coming up. Every day you count. If you have kids, they're probably counting already how many days till school is over. 65 degrees today. All of a sudden, it feels like spring. Right away, they want to know when school is over. So excited. If you're excited for something, you're counting for it. So the Jewish people are so excited about receiving the Torah, they're literally counting every single day. Okay. But the commentaries continue, certainly the Hasidic and Kabbalistic commentaries continue and explain it's not just counting technically when is the Torah giving, it's actually spiritual preparation. There are 7 weeks. Every week represents one of the 7 general character traits of the human soul. And each one is broken into 7. And every day you do your part to refine yourself. Because you see, what happens is God takes us out of Egypt, but we're not worthy of the Exodus. We're still within within our soul, there's still the impurity of Egypt. So we can't receive the Torah the minute after we leave Egypt. It's a process. And the process of refinement takes 7 days. And the process of refinement allows us to purify ourselves. Okay, beautiful. 7 weeks, 7 days, that's the full 7 weeks, 49 days, that's the full gamut of human emotion that we bring the holiness to the full gamut of human emotion. Okay, beautiful. What's interesting is that in the Torah, the way the Torah describes this mitzvah, there's actually a little bit of a contradiction. And it's a little bit confusing. Why? Because the Torah says a few different things that seem contradictory. On one hand, the Torah tells us, you should count 49 days. 7 complete weeks is the quote. Sheva Shabbatot Tmimot. 7 complete weeks. You should count 7 complete weeks. On the other hand, the Torah says, contradictory, the Torah says, Tisperu Chamishim Yom, you shall count 50 days. So now the question is, how many days are we counting? 7 weeks is 49. 50 is not, we're not counting 50 days. We're counting to the 50th day, but that's not what the Torah says. The Torah says, you're going to count 50 days. So it's a contradiction. So how do we resolve the contradiction? And why was it written in such a way that it appears to be a contradiction? So it's obvious. We count 49 days. And the idea is we count 49 days, that's 49 levels. The 50th level is represents the spiritual achievement, the spiritual enlightenment that God gives us that is beyond our own capacity to achieve. So, in other words, we do our part, that's 7 weeks. 7 times 7 is 49. And then God gives us the 50th. So if God gives us the 50th, and that's why we only count 49, because the 50th is what that those spiritual levels that we achieve that is impossible for us to achieve on our own. God has to give it to us. So if that's the case, why does it say that we count 50? The 50th, God counts, not us. But what's the answer? The answer is it's the Torah implies that we're counting 50, even though we're not counting 50, we're only counting 49, because God only gives the 50th to the one who counts 49. So in some ways, it's beyond our it's beyond the scope of what we can achieve. The 50th gate, in the language of the Kabbalah, the 50th gate is what's beyond the seven weeks. So on one hand, it's a gift from above. On the other hand, the gift only comes to the person who does everything in their power and does their seven. So if you do your 7 weeks, you will get the 50th. And that's why on one hand, the Torah says you count seven because we only count seven. You open up the prayer book, that we only count 49. But then the 50th gate is gifted to us, but the Torah implies that we get it on our own, because in a way we get it on our own because we only get it after we do our part. So the same model with the 50 and 49 is essentially the model of 7 and 8. Seven is what we can achieve on our own. 7 days is the days of inauguration. The eighth day is the day that we cannot achieve on our own. God has to gift it to us. Yet it's called eight, which means it continues the seven because it's given to us after we do our part. And this is a model for many, many areas of life, because many areas of life we say, should I, in fact, try to invest and try to better my situation, either physically or spiritually, if I don't see how my action is going to be able to actually solve the underlying problem, right? There are big problems in the world. If I say, well, I want to make my environment an environment of goodness and kindness, ultimately, I want to make the world, transform the world. So is it going to make a difference if I do my little part? I don't have the capacity to make big change. I don't have capacity to go beyond my limited area of influence. So maybe it doesn't pay to try. People say, I don't know, I want to save the environment. So I'm gonna, I'm gonna do one little act of conservation. So what's the point of doing one act of conservation? You're really not gonna, is this gonna really make an impact in the large scale of the problem? So what that does to people, sometimes that paralyzes people. Or should I try to do something nice? Should I try to do something good if I don't feel that this is going to ultimately solve the underlying problem? And what the Torah is telling us with this model is you don't have to solve the problem. In fact, you cannot solve the problem because the problem is beyond you. The problem is number 8. The problem God has to solve. But God will do his part after you do your part, after you fulfill everything you can do, after you do the 7. So that's the paradox of 8. We don't count 8. We only do the 7 days of inauguration. Then 8 comes, but 8 comes from above. But we still count it as 8, as in continuing continuing the spectrum of 7. It follows 7 because the 8 will only come after we do our part. So that's something to think about the name of the parsha number 8, and that's even just the name itself. And then we could continue and go to the following stories about exactly what happens on the 8th day. So in other words, essentially what happens is that the idea that we can bring God into this world, we can bring the infinity of God in our life. Remember, in the temple times, it was through the temple. The temple was the symbol of it. But we talked about this many times. We're achieving this in our life because every person is a figurative temple. Every home is a figurative temple. So we're saying we're going to try to bring holiness into our life, and we're going to cause the infinite light of God to dwell in our house. I mean, that's in a way, it's absurd. The answer is, of course, it's absurd. You don't achieve day 8. Day 8 happens on its own. Day 8, God creates the 8th day. You prepare for the 8th day. You do your part. You do your part, God will do his part. So that's true to everybody in every area. But again, I'm just giving you the general. Now everybody's supposed to think about this and apply it to their life, and hopefully share how it applies to your life as well. Don't be shy to do that. Okay, that's the first point. And we want to continue a little bit. Okay, there's a certain tension that's happening here, and there are all kinds of ways where this tension pops up. So I'm going to try to give this sort of talk about the tension and talk about where you see this tension playing out and talk about and then maybe talk about what the reason for this and maybe how this applies to us. So the tension here is as follows. What exactly is happening here? What is the great drama of the eighth day? What's the great drama of building the temples of God that everybody is waiting in anticipation for the divine presence to dwell? And when the divine presence dwell, everybody is joyous and everyone falls on their face. And this becomes a big deal. Of course, it's a big deal that God wants to dwell, but commentaries point out right away that there is not a backstory. It's not a backstory, but you have to understand the context. Context of the story is where the drama is. What's the context of the story? The context of the story is from the perspective of the people. This story is a story not of a honeymoon, but it's a story of reconciliation. In other words, the Jewish people, God takes the Jewish people out of Egypt. And there are beautiful verses in the book of Jeremiah that we read on Rosh Hashanah in the services and the Haftarah that you think about the relationship between God and the Jewish people as soon as they left Egypt. It's like people in love. God doesn't see our faults. God takes us out of Egypt. We are in love with God. We're almost love is blinding. We're not thinking logically. Like God says, you followed me into the desert, into a land that's not hospitable, right? So it's crazy, right? God says, okay, we're leaving Egypt. Egypt is a civilized country. It's not great to be a slave, but it's better to be a slave than to go out to the desert. You can't survive in the desert. So our love to God, God says in through prophet Isaiah, I remember to you the youth, the love of your youth, the love of your bridal days when you followed me into the desert to a land that's not sowed. So in other words, when the Jewish people leave Egypt, God is blind. God's love is blinding. He doesn't see our faults. We're in love. We're blinded. We're not thinking logically. We follow into the desert. What a beautiful honeymoon. What a beautiful relationship. The problem is, of course, that eventually get to Torah, and then there's terrible betrayal. What is the betrayal? The sin of the golden calf. After the betrayal, what happens? The Jewish people say, so are we going to be able to reestablish this relationship? So after the golden calf, God forgives the people. But just because God forgives, that doesn't mean that the love could be restored. And then there's this beautiful commandment, but you don't understand why the Torah gives so much real estate to this commandment and to the execution of this commandment until you understand the backstory. What's the commandment? God says, "Do me a favor, build me a home. Do me a favor, make a room so I could dwell amongst you." And then you have literally more than a third of the book of Exodus is all about the intricate detail about how they're building this home and what color they're painting the walls and what materials are used, as if it's a construction project, as if anybody cares. So the answer is, of course we care. Why do we care? Because it's not just that God is saying, please make me a home. It's the deeper point. It's that God says, I want to dwell with you. I want to be in your midst. And the reason why that's so radical is because it's after the betrayal. It's after the betrayal of the golden calf. So now we understand the tension. That this is a symbol that God forgives the people for the golden calf. Now we're going to introduce the concept of the tension between Moses and Aaron once we have that backdrop. But in the meantime, Ben, go ahead, please.
Yeah, what do you mean by um, forgive, but not reestablishing the love? I mean, what does it mean to forgive, I guess, at that point?
I think forgive, there are different levels of forgiveness, right? Forgive, that one level, the basic level of forgiveness is, let's say we were best friends, and then, okay, I'll do it. I don't want to, you're a good guy, but let's say me and my friend here, my virtual friend here, whoever, me and Jack were best friends, and then there's betrayal. He betrays me. So at first I'm very upset and I want to destroy him or I want bad to befall him, you know. Then you can get to a point of forgiveness. You know what? I'm not so upset at you anymore. I don't want you to get hit by a truck. Easier said than done. That's a very high level. If the betrayal is very deep and very hurtful, so it's natural to want that to destroy that person or for that person to be destroyed. That's a natural response. It's almost like I'm going to say, even God has it, or the other way around. We have it because God has it. In other words, at some point, you say this person should get what they are deserving, and what they are deserving is punishment. Not that we want to punish, but we want law and order. We want justice to prevail. So part of you says, this person did bad for me, bad to me. This person really harmed me, really hurt me. I want that person to get what he deserves. What does he deserve? He deserves some level of pain. Then I could forgive. I can forgive and say, you know what? Nothing bad should happen to you. And that's basically the level of forgiveness. If I want nothing bad to happen to you, does that mean I want to go have a beer with you? Does that mean I want to go if I'm going on vacation skiing, I want to take you with me? Of course not. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I'm not going to destroy you. Wonderful. That's a great level of forgiveness. But am I going to want to spend my weekend with you? Not necessarily. Then you get the email that the person you betrayed actually wants to spend time with you. That's a much greater level of so in other words, that's the point of you could be forgiveness. Forgiveness, I'm defining the basic level of forgiveness is you don't want harm to befall that person. You don't want the evil that the person did to you to come back to him. Okay. That doesn't mean there's the restoration of love. Love is much deeper. Love is much more profound, and love is much more tricky, much more selective. And that is what says I want to reestablish the relationship. That's the amazing thing about day 8. Okay. So that's in the background. What happens here? So is this the Medrash talks about this, and Rashi talks about this, and all the rabbis like to talk about this, but it's based on a certain tension in the verse. And the
But the,
base,
the
go ahead.
relationship isn't really reestablished in the same way, is what you're saying. It's reestablished, but it's reestablished differently.
It's reestablished differently, and in a way, it's deeper. But the point is, the love is introduced again. That's the point. Maybe it's a different type of love. There's the innocent love, and there's the love that, but the problem with the innocent love is that you don't know if it's strong enough to endure a challenge, right? People fall in love and they get married and they say, well, forever we're going to be together. Are they lying? No, they just don't know. We have no idea whether this love is strong enough to endure a challenge. There's no way to know. How do you know? Not that should be betrayal. Betrayal is an extreme case. But until you have your first fight, you have no idea if the love will survive. What's going to happen? Love is blinding. I read it. You go back to the story of the Garden of Eden. So we have the story of how Eve is created. I know people think that Eve was created. I know people think the Torah says Eve was created from the tsela, from the bone from the rib of Adam, but that's not what it says. It says from the side. In other words, she's part. They're connected. But without getting into all of that, this Torah says that she fell asleep. That God puts Adam to sleep for this surgery of separating Eve and Adam. And why do I have so it's very interesting. It's very good to know that they were asleep, that there was anesthesia. God put them to sleep. But why is that important in the Torah? So somebody said that in a way, what the Torah is telling us, to bring man and woman together, you have to put them to sleep. In other words, there has to be a certain suspension of logic. And that's what falling in love is. Falling in love is God or nature playing tricks and not allowing us to think logically and see the negative in the other person. And the reason for that to be able to create love, to bring people together. So that's a very critical part of creating these relationships. Now, usually that the person is going to wake up and the innocent love is not going to be there anymore. But what happens is you can get a deeper love and a more meaningful love. But we don't know if that's going to happen until there's some tension, until the original love that is blinding, until that love is tested. Now, in this case, it's tested to the extreme. There's actual betrayal. But in any relationship, it's going to be tested to some degree with the tension. Somebody says we were married for 80 years, we never fought. Assuming that's true, I'm not sure it's a good thing, right? The idea is you have to move to the deeper love. But the point here, what I'm trying to say is that's what's at stake here. At stake here is not just so. So of course it's not the same love, but it's reintroducing love, and that's the point here, and that's the tension, and that's what's going to happen on this 8th day. Okay, now let's think about what is the deeper tension here. The deeper tension here is Aaron is doing this whole thing. Now, Aaron is a figure. Think about Aaron and Moses. Now, what's interesting, what happens here is the 7th day of the inauguration that we read about last week's parsha. We didn't have a class last week, but the last week we didn't have a class 2 weeks ago, which is when we would read it. Um, the 7th day of the inauguration, the 7 days of inauguration, Moses performed the service in the temple, which is unusual because Moses is not a priest. Moses is a Levite. And the Levites are only in a supporting role, but they don't actually offer the offerings. It's the priests, it's the Kohanim who actually offer the offerings. So what's happening here is Moshe does the inauguration for does the inauguration for 7 days. In other words, the inauguration process of offering the offerings. The eighth day is the first day that Aaron himself is the first one who is the one who's going to bring these off. Is going to perform this, performing the service in the temple. Now, if you're Aaron, you're a little bit nervous. Why? Because the whole purpose of the service of the temple is to atone for the sin of the golden calf. Who was instrumental in creating the golden calf? Who actually created the golden calf? It was Aaron. Moses was on the mountain; he was off the scene. So Moses is completely pure. Moses is not able to. Moses is not is was had no part in this creating of the golden calf. He wasn't even on the scene. Aaron, by contrast, was the one who actually built it. Now you can find excuses of why he built the golden calf, but he built the golden calf. His fingerprints are on the crime scene, okay? Because the people came to him and said he wanted God, so he tried to slow them down. So he says, you know what? Bring me your gold and silver. He thought they wouldn't. They bring it. Then he wants to make it to slow it down, and he manages to postpone the sin all afternoon to the next morning. But the end, so that's his defense. That's in his defense. But the reality is, Aaron creates the golden calf. So Aaron is now thinks that they perform the service on the eighth day, and what happens? Nothing happens. So Aaron thinks he is undeserving, and he thinks that because he himself participated in the golden calf, he is the blockage. He's actually not going to allow for the atonement to take place. And in a way, he's saying Moshe should have been the priest, not me. And that tension plays out throughout the day. First of all, if you look at the offerings of the day, so I want to show you one or two places. It's actually pretty cool. If you read, so Aaron calls the eighth day, Moshe calls Aaron, and he says, these are the offerings that you should bring. Take for yourself a calf as a sin offering. In Hebrew, Egel ben Bakar, an Egel. Egel is a calf. What does that remind you of? Of course, the golden calf. And remember that I don't know if there's any other place where we refer to a calf as a calf. Even when we bring a calf elsewhere in the Torah as offerings, I think maybe there's an exception, but usually we refer to it as par ben bakar. A par is an ox, the son of cattle. In other words, there's a name to say that he's the son of, that it's a young ox, or but we don't use the word egel. We don't use the word calf. Here we use the word calf. So what does Rashi say? Kach lacha egel, take for yourself a calf. This animal was chosen as a sin offering to indicate that the Holy One, blessed be He, grants atonement for Aaron through the calf, for Aaron's act of making the golden calf. In other words, they're bringing a calf as a sin offering. What does that allude to? The sin of the golden calf. So both Moses and Aaron are very aware. The backdrop is the golden calf. Now we continue when we read they offer all those offerings, and here is the tension at the end. Aaron lifted up his hand toward the people and blessed them. He descended from the altar after having offered the sin offering, the ascent offering, and the peace offering. So Aaron does everything and he blesses them. What happens? Nothing. This is the end of the story. He did all the offering and he blessed them. Then we have a very strange verse 23. Verse 23, Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting. They came and blessed the people, and the glory of God appeared to all the people. So Moses and Aaron once again go into the tent of meeting. They come out, they bless the people again, and then the glory of God appeared. Why didn't the glory of God appear after 22? Why does it appear after 23? What happened? So there's different interpretations. We're going to read the final one in Rashi. Here it goes. Another explanation. When Aaron saw that they had brought all the offering and all the rites had been performed, and yet the divine presence had not descended for the Israelites, he was pained, and he said, I know that the Holy One, blessed be He, is angry with me, and because of me, the divine presence had not descended for the Israelites. He said to Moses, Moses, my brother, is this what you have done to me, that I entered into the service at your bidding and was thus embarrassed? Immediately Moses entered with him, and they prayed for mercy, and the divine presence descended for Israel. And let's continue. They came out and blessed the people. Rashi continues. They said, may the pleasantness of the presence of God, our God, be upon us. That's a verse quoted in Tehillim in Psalms chapter 90. May the pleasantness of the presence of the God be upon us. And the continuation is, of that verse is, may it be his will that the divine presence rest on your handiwork, meaning that the divine presence should dwell in the temple that you built. This particular blessing was necessary since during all the 7 days of installation, when Moses erected the tabernacle, performed service in it, and dismantled it each day, the divine presence did not manifest there. The Israelites felt ashamed and said to Moses, our teacher Moses, all the effort that we expended was in order that the divine presence be manifest among us, so that we may know that we are forgiven for the sin of the golden calf. He therefore said to them, this is what God has commanded you to do in order that the glory of God appear to you. And this is the key phrase. My brother Aaron is more worthy and distinguished than me, for by means of his sacrifices and his service, the divine presence will be manifest among you, and you will know that the omnipresent has chosen him. So we can get into this medrash and talk about exactly how we know this happened or didn't happen, and what verses. In other words, it's basically it's the tension that Aaron blesses the people, nothing happens. Aaron is like, we did this, we tried, it didn't happen, something is wrong, it must be me. So now Moshe and Aaron once again go into the temple, pray to God, come out, bless the people, and then the divine presence dwells. And Rashi gives us the backstory, which is the tension I've been alluding to, is that for 7 days Moshe is performing the work, and Moshe cannot cause the divine presence to dwell. Who causes the divine presence to dwell? Surprisingly, Aaron. Now, if you ask me, it should be the opposite. Why? If this is about the atonement for the sin, so who is more pure? Who is more immune to the effect of sin? Moshe. Moshe has nothing to do with the sin. He wasn't on the scene. He was on the mountain. Aaron creates the golden calf, and yet only Aaron could bring about the atonement. In other words, Aaron's service brings about the divine presence, or divine presence chooses to come. Talk about it's really a person can't do it. A person could just create the vessel for the divine presence to dwell. So, but the divine presence responds to Aaron, not to Moses, and this is very very powerful because in other words, what does God want? Does God want perfection or does God want imperfection? Moses, in this context, is perfect. Moses is perfect because he had nothing to do with the golden calf. He couldn't even stop them. You know, the Talmud says that if a person commits a sin and you have the power to rebuke, you have the power to speak up, and you have the power to influence them, and you don't, so it's your sin as well. You're also implicated because you were silent. So if you were silent, you're potentially an enabler. Moses could not even speak up. He wasn't there. He was somewhere else. So Moses is completely innocent from this sin. So regarding this sin, Moshe is perfect. No one's perfect, but regarding this sin, Moshe is perfect. Aaron, not only is he part of the sin, not only is he flawed, in a way he's central to the sin. Like I said, I could defend Aaron all day, but he's the one who actually built it. And yet, what does God say? God says, you know who can bring the atonement? Not the person who's perfect, the person who's imperfect, the person who has the struggle, the person who could overcome the struggle. He's the person that could bring the divine presence. So we think, where does God want to dwell? We say, oh, of course, God wants to dwell. God wants to be. God wants a relationship with the people who are perfect. Not that anyone's perfect, but relatively perfect. And this story is telling you, no, that's not what God is looking for. If God wanted perfection, he wouldn't create this world. And he would be very happy with the angels in the spiritual worlds who are perfect. But what God wants is a relationship with an imperfect being, the human being, with his struggle, with his tension, with his the overcoming of the struggle, where the love is not natural, where the love has obstacles and has challenges, and yet the people could reestablish and reconnect and self-correct. So even though it's not perfect, it's much more meaningful. So that's the tension of that day. And of course, it applies to our life as well, because we are often certainly spiritual seekers. So when you're looking for spirituality, you're looking for inspiration. It's very easy to self-doubt and say, I'm flawed. I'm not perfect. I'm sure there's somebody better that can do this. But what God is saying is, no, it's specifically Aaron who is able to achieve this great feat of bringing God and bringing this atonement and reestablishing this relationship. So that's a very important point. Another whole way of thinking about this is that it's not really Aaron himself, it's Aaron is connected to the people. We talked about this a little bit on Sundays when we talk about the book of Exodus. We're up to the story of the selection of Aaron. You have Moses and Aaron, and Moses embodies truth and embodies the ideal, But Moses is not necessarily so connected to the people. Aaron is much more connected to the people, which explains why he participated in creating the golden calf in the first place. He understood what the people need, and he understood that he has to try to slow them down. And most importantly, he understood if he told them no at this point, they wouldn't listen. So Aaron says, let me at least try to minimize the damage. So Aaron represents the person, the leader who feels the needs of the people and he feels the challenge of the people. And therefore it is Aaron who can help them. And there's a very beautiful Hasidic interpretation that, in short, that says if you want to connect to somebody else, let's say you're in a role where you're anchored and you are somewhat safe, and the other person needs help. The other person is going through a challenge or a tension. Let's say you're a parent or a spouse or a friend. So who's going to be the best? Who is going to be the best? Who will be the best at helping the person struggling? Is it somebody that is completely protected from the struggle and knows nothing about it? Or is it somebody that can understand and can empathize, that can feel the pain, and in some ways also suffers from this same problem, and yet they know how to uplift themselves and later uplift you? So what the Torah is telling us, Aaron, specifically because he's implicated in the sin of the golden calf, that's how he can elevate the rest of the people and reconnect and reconnect their love to God and therefore God's love to them. And if you even want a visual, there's an actual visual here that happens. And the visual is like this. The visual is, so Aaron is sort of on the altar doing all the service. And then it says, Vayis Aaron. Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them. He descended from the altar. Vayered. He goes down. Now, of course, he went down. If you went up to perform the service, eventually you came down. But no, what's happening here is that Aaron has to descend. I'm sorry, the Torah emphasizes that Aaron descends. Why is that? It's not just a technicality. It means that Aaron is on a lower level. He descends because he connects and he feels the spiritual state of the people. And if he feels connected to them and he feels their struggles, so he also descends. So that's in a way, that's the first step of being able to help somebody else is feeling their pain, making yourself vulnerable to their pain. So you're descending spiritually as well. But then you can't stay down. Then you have to actually pull yourself out. So then you can offer counsel and offer advice and offer encouragement. And that's verse 23. Moses and Aaron, after Aaron goes down, he goes back in. Doesn't say he goes back up, but he goes back into the temple. Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting. They came out and blessed the people, and the glory of God appeared to all the people. Moses never goes down, even though, of course, he went down. But the Torah doesn't say it because Moses is completely removed from their experience. So he can't. He may be perfect. He may be perfect in the sin of the golden calf, but he can't help the people. Remember, the divine presence is dwelling in the temple, not just for Moses or Aaron themselves. Well, I would say primarily, not even. In other words, the divine presence is dwelling for the people. The question is, who is instrumental in creating this, in making this happen? Who is the one who can sort of be the bridge to connect God and the people? Whose service is going to symbolize that the relationship has been restored? So the point here is it is not Moshe, but Aaron, because Aaron feels them and feels their pain. And therefore, when they're low, he's low. When they go down, he goes down. And yet you go back up. So you feel the other person's pain. You understand the struggle. Then you have to pull yourself away from that perspective to anchor yourself. Then you can pull them out. So that's another way of reading this whole tension between Moshe and Aaron. And ultimately, it is Aaron that is the one who brings the divine presence into whose service creates the vessel for the divine presence to dwell. So that's sort of, I think we read about the first word of the parsha, or the first section of the parsha, and there's a lot more to say, but we only have 6 minutes. So what I want to do is skip the main drama, which is the death of the sons of Aaron. The reason why I want to skip it is because I talk about it every year. I want to go to the end of the parsha. What's the end of the parsha? What would you expect finally after the temple dwells? God is in the temple. Everything is wonderful. It's the culmination of the Exodus and the giving of the Torah. And now we have the divine presence dwelling in our midst. What would you expect to happen? So there's all kinds of. It's strange. The first thing the Torah tells us is, oh, this is how you eat. This is the kosher meat. This is the kosher animals. These are the non-kosher animals. These are the kosher insects. These are the non-kosher insects, the kosher birds. Right away, food. Right away, talking about food. Probably because the Jews, after the service, they went to a kiddush, so you have to talk about the food. Now, that's only a joke. But there's a serious matter here. We built the temple, and we're talking about food. Which foods are okay, which foods are not okay. So there are many ways to read this, but I'm going to tell you one interpretation that I like. And that is, but it relates to the concept of the 7 days of inauguration that we talked about earlier, and we talked about in the previous parsha. And there's a way of reading the entire story of what's happening here. So this originates from, I don't know if it originates, it's a Kabbalistic reading. I saw it in one of the students of the Arizal. He wrote a book called Siftei Kohen, The Lips of the Priest. His name was, I forget his first name, but he was Tzvi HaKohen, I forget his name, but he wrote a book called Siftei Kohen, and he's a Kabbalah student of the Arizal, and he writes, and he writes it the following. He says that the name Adam, Adam and Eve. Adam represents the name that God, the person God creates, and Adam represents the wholesome human being. He's the wholesome human being. And after the sin of the tree of knowledge, which is the first sin the Torah records, when Adam and Eve have a spiritual descent, the Torah stops referring to the human being as Adam. There's other names in Torah for man, Ish, but not Adam. And then you ride through the end of the book of Genesis and the entire book of Exodus, and there's no word Adam. The name Adam, the word Adam, as a name for for a person, does not appear until the opening of the third book. What happens in the third book? The opening words of the third book. God spoke to Moses from the tent of meeting. Vayikra Moshe, God called to Moshe from the tent of meeting, and he said to him, okay, that's the introductory verse. What's the first verse of what's the second, what's the first word of the second verse after the introduction? Adam. Kiyakriv, a man who wants to draw close, they should bring these offerings. So before I read this Kabbalistic commentary, okay, Adam is a legitimate way to say, to refer to a person. But that's because I'm not reading carefully. The Shach, the Sifsei Kayan says, 1 second, slow down. This word is a bombshell. We have not had this word in 2 books of the Torah, all the way back from the original Adam. Never again did we refer to a human being as Adam, which means the name of wholesomeness. So this is a bombshell, this word, Adam. We can recreate that state of harmony that Adam had before the original sin. And that's why that Kabbalist says, the Kabbalists now explain that the Torah gives a great deal of the 7 days of inauguration. And they say the 7 days of inauguration, actually in Hebrew, we don't use the word inauguration, which is chinuch, which is education. We use the word miluim, to fill up. We are refilling the 7 days. In other words, we're correcting the world that was created in 7 days and which took a spiritual hit and a spiritual descent because of the sin of Adam and Eve. And now when we build the temple, we are recreating a place of spiritual harmony. So in other words, one way to think about this is we're actually going back to book number 1. And we're recreating the Garden of Eden. What's the Garden of Eden? The Garden of Eden is a place. God creates Adam and Eve in this world, and this world is supposed to be a place of harmony. It's not supposed to be a place of tension. And what does God tell Adam and Eve? You're in the garden. Your job is to work in the garden, keep it beautiful. And what should you do? Eat all the fruit of eat all the trees, all the fruit of the trees of the garden. Only one tree you can't have. So what are you supposed to do? What mitzvah did they have? They had a negative mitzvah, which is don't eat of the tree of knowledge. But they had a positive mitzvah. What was the positive mitzvah? Eat of all the trees. Meaning the mitzvah was to eat. What does that mean? It means that they're in a spiritual state where the spiritual and the physical are in harmony. So eating is not just a physical act to satiate the body or give the body pleasure, but it's a state of harmony. Eating is for the soul as well, because it's the way of the soul sanctifies the physical. The point of contact where the food, where the world is elevated within the person, and the person's eating for a spiritual purpose. So the Garden of Eden is a place of harmony between spiritual and physical. And that's why there's a mitzvah to eat all the fruit of the trees. One exception, because there's also negativity. Because we're in the physical world, so there's negativity, but the negativity is separate and apart. Adam and Eve do not have a desire, a natural desire for the negative. So it's a place of peace and harmony. Now, because of the sin, they were expelled from the Garden of Eden. What does it mean we were expelled from the Garden of Eden? So one way to look at it, we were expelled. And it's just a punishment. But the Kabbalistic way of looking at it is we were expelled, we were sent out. Why were we sent out? We were sent out to say, when God created the Garden of Eden, when God created a place of harmony, the human beings botched it up. Why? Because it was gifted to them, so they don't appreciate. Now God says, you go create a place of harmony between God, between matter and spirits. You go create, recreate the Garden of Eden on a small scale. Well, really, ultimately, in a large scale. So the Messianic era, the world will reach perfection when the entire world is in a place of harmony. The point here is the third book of the Torah begins once we build the temple. What is the temple? It's a miniature Garden of Eden. It's a place where, even though there is tension in the world, even though there's still negativity in the world, but there's a place where there's harmony between body and soul, between physical and spiritual. That's why we say Adam. Now Adam has been restored. Now this being that has harmony between body and soul has been restored. Now the temple is so now Garden of Eden has been restored. So now that we say, what is the temple? The temple is Garden of Eden. What is Garden of Eden? Harmony between body and soul. So what's the first thing you do? You have to eat in a holy way. Because eating in the holy way, just like with Adam and Eve, the point was eat in a holy way. Right now, we're saying, could you eat in a holy way? Where the physical experience of eating is also imbued with spiritual meaning, of elevating the physical and making it part of the service of God. So it's in a way exact copy of the model of the Garden of Eden, which is very inspiring because it means even though I can't necessarily, we have not reached perfection yet, the world as a whole and my life as a whole is not a place of harmony. There's tension and there's ups and downs, and God wants those, and that's why Aaron is the one who's chosen to bring the divine presence into the world because Aaron represents the tension and the difficulty and the challenge. But the point of the challenge is to create space with his harmony and ultimately to expand that space. And that's why that's expressed. The first thing we read about is how do you eat? How do you eat means how do you create that how do you eat in a holy way? How do you make that the food is kosher? But it means kosher means you're eating it in the proper way. And in that sense, the eating is not just a physical act, a biological act, or an act of pleasure, but it's also a spiritual act. And that creates the harmony between the body, but also the body and the soul. So there's a lot to talk about, but I think this is a beautiful idea. And that's it. That's it for today. Everyone should have a wonderful day. Comments, questions, welcome. Otherwise, have a wonderful day and great to see you as always. I'm sorry for going 2 minutes late.
Thank
I
you.
apologize for that. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you.